All right. Good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Back with another office hours. We're blessed to have Nate back in the office after a little vacation. Um, yeah, so we'll kick it off with some announcements. Nate's back.
Hello.
So I think we have a bunch of questions lined up. Also, recently I updated Derby Starter, I think it was, so that it would properly connect to the store. Like just Derby Starter, the default store setup thing for like the Derby examples, and makes it easy to start with projects. So now, if you make two Derby Starter apps and point them to the same store, they'll correctly use like the pub/sub communication to sync their state. So that was like, I guess, a bug that I ran into trying to make the example for the Derby site, and so now it's fixed. So yay. Do you have any?
I'm just getting up to speed on things. Right before I left, there was a bunch of work I was doing on ShareJS to make it more reliable. There were a bunch of bugs that I fixed, and also my next set of work is going to be on a bunch of efficiency things, since we're starting to run into scaling problems. So expect the framework to get a lot more scalable, which is good. And then I'm going to be wrapping up the remaining work for publishing an official DerbyJS 6.0 version soon. Basically, the list of stuff in that I have planned is being able to load styles from components, which I know Pavel did some stuff toward. Make components require other components, which I know Carl spent some time looking into. And then redoing the tracks routing library, which apparently we can reuse some stuff that other people have been working on. So that's helpful. So basically, that's my my final list of things I want to fix. And overall, I think like a lot of the major bugs are out at this point. There's definitely still some work to make bindings more efficient and events more efficient, but it's pretty stable at this point overall.
Cool, yeah. And yesterday we went over a backlog of pull requests and issues that have shown up recently and try to triage them. So I'll probably be taking care of a couple, and yeah, we're just gonna keep trying to bring those inbox zero eventually.
Yep.
One day.
One day we'll get to zero.
Yeah.
Keep it that way.
So do any of you guys have any announcements? Stuff you want to share? Stuff you've been doing with Derby? Or share?
I don't have any announcements. I'm a big fan of ShareJS, and I'm using it for some music collaboration projects. So I just wanted to come check out, see what you guys are doing. That's all.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Welcome. Do you have any like links to stuff, or are you doing it as part of performances?
No, you know what? I have a website called beatlab.com that I made like 5 years ago. It has nothing to do with ShareJS, and it's I'm actually a little embarrassed to share it because it's kind of falling apart. But it has like a lot of users, and it's like a really simple way to make collaborative musical projects. But I'm working on rebuilding the entire thing using ShareJS as like a core, so that things can be more collaborative by default. I'm going to add like a lot more deeper, richer features to it as well. So, yeah, I remember when I saw ShareJS released, maybe like 2 years ago or something, and I was like, oh, I wish this existed when I started, because it's
Cool.
So
very cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't really have any questions or concerns or anything. I just wanted to kind of see what you guys are up to.
Sure thing.
Yeah, well, joining.
Yeah, welcome. Cool. What about you, Carl or Eugen? Anything new this week?
No, I think no. Nothing new for now.
All right. Well, there are some questions that Mateo has put notes in the document. but he hasn't joined the chat yet. Let's see if...
We might as well answer them. You can always watch the video.
It's true. So his first one should be pretty simple to answer. Why is it necessary to execute model.del inside of a model.fetch or model.subscribe? For such an operation, wouldn't it be okay to do it without having to fetch or subscribe to the document first?
So he brings up a point which is sort of true, because technically LiveDB has a way that you can submit operations where you say that no matter what the version is, go ahead and apply this operation. So it's almost like last writer wins. So I guess it could do that, but just basically that would be a lot of complexity to add. So the basic rule in Share is that you can't modify a document until you know what its basic version is. So you have to know, like, I'm working from version 5 and I'm changing this to that, so that when another operation happens concurrently, it can be operationally transformed. So in the case of like deleting an entire document, because the transform ends up just kind of deleting it anyway, technically we don't have to, but it's not, in my opinion, really worth the effort to like special case that, since it's not something you do all that often. But basically the reasons there are more for things like if you're gonna like modify an array and move things around, we need to know what version it was at when you do that move operation, so that we know how to transform that against, say, someone's insert on that array. We need to know what you were starting from.
Hi guys.
Hey.
Hey, there you are.
Actually, just answered one of your questions.
Sorry guys.
It's all good.
No problem. This is the first one. It was kind of easy one, so I wrote the notes and.
We can circle back later to the video.
Yeah.
So why is it necessary to execute model on inside model subscribe? I didn't dive into the model on code yet. I mean, it's not technically. So they just do what they do. So model on is an event listener, and whenever the data changes, it'll call the callback to say, hey, this data changed in some way. What model subscribe does is, first of all, it does a fetch, so it gets you the current version of the document, and then whenever the document changes on the server, it sends you the latest stuff about that document. So the reason that you'd probably combine the two is that you want to get notified when a subscribed document changes remotely, but they just do two different things, and so like, no, there's no reason why you do need to nest them, but like the common pattern is to use both of them together, because the subscribe, all it does is bring the changes into the model and call the callback or tell you about them. The on is what calls the callback when the changes happen. And if you just did the on without the subscribe, then of course you're listening to changes, but nothing's going to change.
Okay, because I just tried, and the model on without the subscribe actually doesn't. It doesn't execute anything for me. So maybe I'm using.
Right, because there's no events being emitted.
Well, really, there is actually, because if I put the model subscribe back, then the function inside the model on are executed.
Right. So what I'm saying is, all model on does is it calls the callback when the data changes.
Yeah.
Right? So if you were to say model on some stuff and then you were to change it locally in the same model, then that would call the callback. But model on and then change the model in a different model, right? Like change the data in a different model. There's no way that that first model is going to know about the data changes unless you're subscribed to the data changes.
Okay,
Subscribe is just about getting the remote stuff local, and on is about calling the callback. They do two different things.
Okay, I see now. Yeah, the thing is, I was doing all the changes and all the modifications in another model, so that's why it wasn't called. Okay.
So subscribe is basically what does the synchronization. On is what calls your callback.
Of course. Okay, it's clear now.
Cool. How to properly listen for model events for a collection or some objects.
Yeah, and this question was coming directly from my use case that I was just trying now. It's somehow related to the question before.
Okay.
And so basically what I'm seeing, my case is, okay, I have this module that's called statistics, which computes all the statistics that I need in an asynchronous way when some data on the DB changes. Okay,
right.
So I subscribe to the audits collection, and when this collection is updated, I need to compute some statistics and put them in another collection. Let's say the statistic collections.
Okay.
But the thing here is that maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I cannot find a way to listen properly to the events that I want. For example, I want to know when an audit is inserted, is added to the audits collection. Okay, so in theory, I should listen for the maybe change or insert event. I was thinking only to listen for the insert to the change event, because look into the code, I found that when you do model.add, then it does a model.set, which actually fires the change event.
Right.
The thing here is that when I'm doing the model.add, as stated at the end, actually model.add in the audits collection of some object, I actually get only those two events. I get the load event and the insert event.
Right. So the data isn't. There's different events that mean different things. So the load event means that the data was added to this model. And the reason why you get a load event and not a change event is that the data didn't actually change locally because you didn't have it until the data was already created, and then it was added to your model. So the reason why the events are different is because you might want to like do something when something changes, but when something's added to your model, it didn't necessarily change. It just means now it matches your query.
Okay.
So now you get the data, and then unload correspondingly is the data was removed from your model.
Yeah.
So basically, like load and unload means specifically new data has like been added to your model, but it's not been changed since it was added. When you would get a change event would be if the data were already in your model and then it were overwritten. That would be a change. And so like if you were listening locally, like the place where you were making the ad and you were listening, what you would have seen was a change event because you already had the data and it changed there. But in the second model that's listening, the data was changed before it entered the model. So when it did enter the model, it was a load.
Okay.
So yeah,
What about insert though?
So insert, well, I don't know what the insert event's happening on. I assume you're seeing it on a query, probably?
No, actually my code is just before I do the model subscribe and then model on. All.
Yeah, okay.
And star.
Okay, so the load
I
makes
do this.
Is on the query.
And the console log is the one after.
Oh, because you're listening on the entire anything that happens to the entire model, not to the audits collection.
So the reason you're getting an insert on the query is that the way that queries work internally is, as you can see, it's like some wacky model path that's under $ queries, which is mostly for internal use. But basically, the query mirrors, when you use a subscribe to a query, it mirrors the ID set that's on the server. And so if like a new thing gets added to that query, it can get added in the right place. So the insert is tracking the fact that, and as you can see, the third argument is what was inserted. So basically, the new ID is being added to the list that keeps track of what the query results are. So that's what those two events are. So if you wanted to listen to specifically when a new document is matching your query, the load event is the correct event to listen to.
Okay. The thing here is that then how to understand in which collection I need to listen to. So, for example, I'd like to do just the model.on all, okay, audits.
Yes. So
if I do this,
to all changes, you should read over the documentation again in the events thing.
yeah.
That listens to all changes on specifically the path audits. So
Yeah.
the thing that loads isn't audits, because that's the whole collection. It's audits.random ID, whatever the heck it is. Right. Okay. So if you want to listen to specifically the event that's happening here, the pattern would be model on load or all, which would pick it up too. But model on load, and then it would be audits, and then you can either say .star, which will explicitly only listen for changes on the document itself under audits, or you could listen to audits.star, which is everything underneath audits, including the document as well as all the subpaths, or audits ***, which is audits as well as everything underneath it. Those are the patterns that you could use. But okay. The most specific one would be load audits.star would match what you want, and then you'll get an ID, which is the capturing part of the pattern as one of the arguments to the event listener.
Okay, I tried that. I think I encountered that before, but I was a little bit confusing, so I thought I was wrong. But yeah.
It could have been that maybe like you were listening for the change thing, which is an understandable confusion. And maybe that was, you just have to try the pattern with the correct load event.
Yeah.
Or the all event.
Okay, I'm trying the all event with audits.star now, and it doesn't fire any event. So, but anyway, I will try better later. Maybe.
That should work.
I'm trying the .star only now, and yeah, okay.
Can you do all or load?
I'm doing all.
What was the difference between ** and star and .** again?
.* is one specific nested. .** is one or more nested. ** is the same thing or nested. The dots enforcing the separation, if that makes sense.
Well, it doesn't catch the events and
the same thing or nested.
But yeah, I need to go through it more. With more patience, maybe.
I can maybe look at it later offline, but that's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, okay.
Why don't we try and get through the rest of the questions and then
sure.
Go back if needed.
Yeah, and you can make a gist if it's really stuck. All right, so how do we deal with joins at Lever?
So the short answer is that we do it manually. So Mongo doesn't really have super awesome join capabilities built in. So basically you do a query and then you get whatever IDs you need out of that, and then you do another query. We end up doing a good number of queries that have like a $sign in and then an array of IDs or something like that, or like, you know, some sort of reference thing. So that's the gist of it. That doesn't like automatically update in real time the join itself, which generally isn't a big deal for our application. So it hasn't come up a lot. There is a feature that's frankly a little bit half-baked in Racer that's supposed to help with this, where you can basically query like a path that's in the model, and then you can store a list of IDs at that path, and then as you change that list of IDs, it changes the query. At the moment, it has some bugs, and I mostly wrote it for the chat example, which is where you can see it. So I've been meaning to circle back and fix that. So the long answer to this is, of course, it would be sweet to be able to do real-time joins on the server. The problem with doing it this way is that you have to do this, especially if you're doing the queries from the client side. You have to run the query, get some results, and then run another query, which is a very expensive round trip. So there's basically two ways we could address that. One would be like defining some sort of data mapping that, or not data mapping, but like function that maps the data on the server. So you'd say like subscribe to some collection that's a fake collection, sort of like projections, and then it would like do on the server the second hop that you would need to do, which would be a lot more efficient, so you don't have to do the full round trip. And then potentially also like real-time update the query and all of that. Just haven't written that. Another option I recently thought about was we could do something where, kind of like how Racer works internally. So Racer has this concept of references, which are basically parts of the model that mirror other parts of the model. So as one thing changes, it updates the source of the reference, and then it also copies that data somewhere else. So kind of similarly, we could store in the database, in persistent storage, the fact that something cross-references something else. And then you could basically say, when you do the subscribe, like I want this stuff and the stuff it references, either maybe by default or maybe by adding something. Haven't really fully spec'd this out. But what's cool about that is it could be a little bit more automatic and could be done at a pretty low level, like inside of LiveDB, which would be a lot more efficient, and probably about as efficient as you could get with Mongo itself. And then for other databases, of course, we haven't really done support for a SQL database, but that would be a thing to think about in the future. And another thing that's interesting is RethinkDB, which is actually doing live real-time stuff as a native feature. It's the first database I'm aware of that's actually really doing a good job of this. And quite an interesting thing. Could be actually a much better fit for Derby than what we're currently doing. Rethink only added this feature super recently. And they also just recently kind of declared that they're finally stable. So it's still a pretty young database in the world of databases. And it's a pretty small company, but that's really exciting. I've been meaning to reach out to them when I got back, so I'm going to do that soon. And they're another YC company, so we'll chat. So that's pretty exciting. And then they also actually do real-time joins as a built-in feature. So that's kind of interesting. So in short, right now we mostly just sort of do whatever we have to do for the specific case, and it's all very manual. I've got some ideas about how we can do a better job of it, but they're all just ideas at this point.
All right, thanks. I guess that kind of answered both my first and the third question.
Right. So then the model layer. So for a proper architecture, it's nice to have a model layer. Maybe nice to have an open source repo or plugin which adds such functionality. It's possible to add specific models.
I don't really understand what that means.
Like ORM.
I guess the model variable we have is kind of the model layer, but if you think of more the business logic layer,
in an application, then it's kind of nice to wrap that around a collection, for example.
Right.
And it would be kind of nice to have some more open sourcey effort for that kind of wrapper. I think that could benefit a lot by being developed in open. And it would just be nice to have some kind of repository for that kind of stuff to work in, and some ideas how to do that.
So you mean like it'd be nice to have a built-in capability to add like ORM-like features, or do you mean changing how rates are structured to make it more capable for people to edit, or what do you mean?
No, I think what I'm referring to is that actually I think it's maybe nicer to have it as a plugin, because then people can choose if they want to use it or not, and it's easy to make alternatives for people who want to do it in some other way. But it would be nice if anyone has any ideas, or if you have ideas on how to properly structure that kind of stuff in general.
Is our lever collection stuff something that we want?
No, I hate that how that's written.
Okay.
So yeah, we wrote something internally. I don't like it, but been meaning to eventually rewrite it well and then publish it. So I have a couple of thoughts along these lines. One is that the way Racer is currently set up is very tied to ShareJS, which isn't necessary. But there are certain things it does which Derby needs to rely on some sort of standard API in order for it to work the way it works. Because Derby is like, the whole point of how the framework's written is that the model layer has to be pretty smart in order for Derby to work efficiently. Unlike something like React, where the model layer can actually be really, really simple and really generic because the view is really smart and knows how to like do complicated diffs and stuff like that. The idea in Derby is that the model tells you exactly what changed, and so Derby doesn't have to be smart about doing diffs. It just has to be good at mapping very granular model changes into the appropriate view changes. There's a very different architecture, and is actually designed specifically to work well with OT, which is sending around highly granular changes. So it would be possible, of course, to use something else other than OT behind that, and in some cases might be efficient enough. But for a variety of reasons, the model API needs to have pretty granular update capabilities, and Derby needs to hook into those specifically. Like it can't just have like a change event. Like it needs to have the insert event and the change event and like the low-level events. And like string mutation is something that's built in, and those kind of things need to be pretty granular. So, it would be possible to rip out the OT stuff, because you can also use the model as just like local, and that works great. So I've been meaning to eventually do that. It's not like on my most immediate priority list, but it's definitely on it. And the goal there is to make it so that Derby is more useful in more contexts. Like maybe you want to use it as a module in a page, and you're not running a ShareJS server. You're just you've just got a really simple REST backend, and you just want to add some functionality that's in a Derby component. That should be easy to do. So that's one of the kind of concepts. The ORM-y stuff, I've got some ideas around. Right now, it's pretty tricky to do. To add functionality to the model in a way that's generic, like for a user, it should have these methods or something. So I have some half-baked ideas, but haven't really honestly gotten anywhere where it's worth talking about. But it'd be nice to use objects that are prototypes, and upcoming ES6 has classes, so properly support that. The reason why it's a bit tricky is it would have to be well integrated with the operational transformation code, because that code actually like does mutations and like creates objects. And the way it does syncing is over the internet, it's sending JSON. So there's no way, obviously, to send typed objects with prototypes over the internet. We have to use JSON or something and translate that into typed objects in the browser or on the server. So there's like some question of whether that's like worth bothering with, worth like updating the prototype of the objects as you like pull stuff into memory, or whether it's better to just like have functions that are defined that the data is actually stored as JSON internally, but the functions kind of abstract that away from you. So I haven't really like prototyped those two options yet, but those are the two obvious options. So one day definitely we'll have some way to use an alternative to ShareJS as a backend, and so would like to break out a lot of the model-specific functionality outside of the ShareJS stuff, which would basically just be splitting Racer into at this point. But it's yeah, I mean, Racer is a model. Like Racer is an open source project that's just a model layer. So like if you look at the code, it's like 90% the implementation of the model. That's pretty much all it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I was just thinking that in one way, yeah, I guess it's a model layer, but you, of course, you might want to have all of these specific functionality for a specific, like, let's compare it to if you have Ruby on Rails, for example. Sure. Then you have your model layer there, and you want to add the functions for users, for example, for the users table.
Right.
So
that's what I meant by something more like an ORM. So like that's I view like this is like actually a couple separate things. Like one is making it so you can plug and play different implementations of a compatible API that Derby could hook into. Another part of it is, like I said, like how do you add those common functionalities to specific types of objects? It's not trivial if you think about the fact that it would have to be integrated with the OT code. That's why it's not just like Backbone, where it's really simple. So the fact that currently the OT code is only guaranteed to work on JSON objects and not to make objects that have prototypes is why that's not obvious. So we can either make other objects that reference those objects that can be OT'd, or we can try and like make the OT code directly manipulate objects that have prototypes. And those are kind of the two major options. I haven't really it hasn't been as high priority as some other things in terms of like figuring it out, but it's something I've been thinking about.
All right. Well, now I get it better.
Hopefully that's a little bit helpful. I know that's not a super satisfying answer.
Yeah. No, I was just curious, and
yeah,
there wasn't that many questions for today, so I thought, why not?
No, it's a good question. Yeah, I think I talked about Rethink a little bit. It seems great, but I mostly am wary of anything that's new, which I think is a pretty classic engineer approach to things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. How to access the history of a model object from Derby? You can't right now, but Ian's typing out how to access it via Mongo.
I think, doesn't Share also have a REST API that you can use to get I don't know how to turn it on like within.
Yeah, it has a REST API. I don't know if it exposes the ops. Also, the way the REST API is currently implemented, it like uses Express 3, but you can't use it at the same time as Express 4. So I've been meaning to fix that. And it's definitely got some known bugs. Or I'm actually thinking about just completely removing it from ShareJS itself because it doesn't really make sense that it's part of ShareJS.
You can just
This
because
is repo altogether that plugs in.
we do this though. And this actually is something I've been meaning to make an open source version of, but like a little tool to browse your sort of like a WYSIWYG query thing for Mongo or like for Racer, where you can make a query and it would give you the documents or subscribe to them. They'd be live bound.
Yeah.
But then you just click and it does an AJAX request to get the ops, and then you can reconstruct stuff at a certain version, a certain point.
It's not an unreasonable ask to have it be built into ShareJS. So ShareJS would just be able to have some sort of API where you could get a doc at a version and it would construct it.
What about a LiveDB?
Or LiveDB,
where you
whatever.
Do a certain kind of query where you're like $ops and
no, LiveDB already has queries to get the ops.
But I mean, so that you could expose it to Racer or
Right. So LiveDB has that. ShareJS does not, which is where the API ends. It ends at LiveDB right now.
Okay.
So you could write a server that plugs into LiveDB and gets the ops, but there's not an API that's like get me the document that has been transformed to this version anywhere.
Right.
It's really just a for loop. It's actually very simple.
Right.
But we haven't exposed it as an API.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how it would integrate with Racer. There's also the other thing that we wanted to do is make it possible to truncate the ops at some point. So basically have a TTL where after a certain amount of time, all the old ops get collapsed and thrown away. But the thing that's been holding that up is we want to store what the document was at that first version, which this is not that much work, but we just need to do it. So we should be storing a snapshot of the doc at the beginning so that we can at least because actually the current OT type does support reverse operations, I believe, for all the operations, but it's not strictly required that the types do, I think was Joseph's claim. So he wasn't sure if he was working on a new type and he wasn't sure if he was going to implement the reverse of operations in it. So it would be best to store the starting snapshot and then all the operations since that.
Okay, because for our cases, we actually don't need the ops collections, and for us, just knowing and a bunch of data written to DB, which we don't need. So
you need them if you are doing OT, which is how the framework works. So if anyone were to modify things at the same time, that is the whole point of the ops collections, right? It's not not there for you to use directly. It's there for internal purposes.
Yeah, of course. But for the most of our cases, we don't do there's someone who is writing to DB and someone who is reading from the DB. And we actually have, most of the time we have space constraints, unfortunately, to our customers. And writing lots of ops, it's a pain for us. So we periodically delete all the _ops collections, which is not so kind, I see, and can understand.
Probably lead to bugs, but
I mean, for now it works. So the other question, because sometimes for us would be just good enough to update the document and have a model function, so a Derby function to say get me the version before. And
okay, but if we delete the ops, we won't be able to do that. So just to be clear.
What? Sorry?
If you delete the ops, we won't be able to do that, to be clear.
Yes, indeed. And that's why I usually keep the last one. So I keep the one in the collection and the last one in the _ops. But The other thing is, would be possible to, let's say, disable the underscore ops collections, maybe somehow in ShareJS, or just write in the last one, so that ShareJS only write the last one?
I mean, yes, it would be possible. That's not really what the framework's designed for.
Yeah, of course.
So,
Well, couldn't you make your own LiveDB driver that like would it work at that layer in the LiveDB Mongo where it's
there's just a lot of things that use ops, right? Like, so if you reconnect and you have an old version, like the way it works is it says, get me all the stuff that's changed. So you can modify that to say, do something if it can't, like it could return an error, and then the client could say, throw everything away, and then load everything again, or instead the server could say, oh, you don't have that, so I'm just going to send you the latest version, and then the client could work with that. Maybe the client could figure out some way to do a diff. There's just lots of problems that come up when you want to use a different mechanism. Like the way Meteor works is like completely different than the way ShareJS works, and so they've solved all these problems for Meteor, but Meteor uses last writer wins. So obviously it's very different. So like basically what I'm saying is like, yes, of course, and those are valid ways of wanting to synchronize data, but they're just different than the main focus of ShareJS and Derby, which is about collaborative editing, not about real-time following along somebody else's edits.
Okay.
That could be another feature, but it's just a whole other paradigm. It's like a whole other thing with its own set of problems.
Of course.
Yeah. So I could see it like, there's probably various levels of hacks that would work. But in the short term, the thing that I will be doing is archiving of, like, there will be a way to correctly archive old ops. Multiple people have asked for this. And that makes total sense even in the world of OT, because it's pretty unlikely that clients are going to reconnect with like month-old operations. And so it's probably okay to drop those on the floor and just ignore them. Yeah, though even doing that really well is like still kind of tricky, because we, in an ideal world, would tell the user like, oh, hey, like, here's the current version of that. We can't apply your changes because we don't know how. But, you know, do you want to, you know, somehow diff your edits against what's there now, and like how a whole sort of process for that would be ideal. What we'll end up probably doing is just giving them an error and throwing away all their work, which could be frustrating.
Of course.
Should have submitted that report a month ago. Or,
what do you mean?
well, like whatever they were doing, they shouldn't have waited a month to,
I see.
to get internet connectivity. And
I mean, I guess, but
there.
the whole idea is that, anyway.
It's not very collaborative, man.
Yeah, so maybe it can be like per collection. Anyway, we'll figure it out. But there will be an API for cleaning up ops. It will, but it will still use ops as the core way things work. For now. Cool. Well, I think we should wrap.
Yeah, we're kind of at our time.
Any last questions or anything?
Yeah, one question. Hi guys, nice to see you,
how's it
Nate.
going, man?
Good, good. How was your trip to London?
It was good, except that I had the flu for most of it, which was lame. But such things happen.
Yeah. Well, I have one question related to the views. Can we use component.getView to get some partial from some particular component, and also use the scope of this component?
Okay.
So can we do this or not? Can we use the scope of the component if we want to get some partial from some other part of the site.
Wait, you want to get a view from a different controller, like a different component or something?
Yeah. Yeah, so that's right.
Yeah, you
So
can do
the thing
that.
is that
So you just need a reference from one component to another, or you can do it from the page. So page also has a get view, and you can always access the page from the component. So you can say @page.getView, and then you can say the fully qualified name. So you can say like whatever your component name, colon, then the view, and that's probably the easiest way to do it. The other thing you could do is one component could get a reference to the other component, which you could, for example, use as to do. So you could say like as whatever, which would add it to the page, or you could say as page dot something, right? So it's like sort of global-ish, and then you could say that name dot get view. So yes, it's all just they're all just methods on controller objects, so you can definitely use them from anywhere.
Okay.
And then there's also, so get view will get you the view itself, which is an object that is like a template. It's like an object representation of your template, which is what actually does the rendering. You can also say get to get the rendered HTML, or get fragment to get a document fragment, which is like a DOM piece that's rendered. So all of those are accessible either on the component or on the page.
So if you did, would you do like @page.get full path to view, and then you'd say like you'd give it this component, or like?
No, it just uses the model. So page.get will use the page model, so it'll be like the top level model, right?
So if I'm in this component, but I can render.
Well, @page is a reference to page, so now you're in page.
Right. So, but what he wants is to render.
He wants to get the view for a different component. So the way you can do that is you can either say @page get view other component colon view name.
Right.
Or
then
you
how
can
do you render that with this component's model?
So one way you can do it is you can actually just set the view in the model of this component as just a name, right? So you can say like other thing I want to render, and then you can just use that name in your template for this component.
And so that would be set view?
No, it's just set, model set. You can store templates in the model itself. Templates are objects, so you can put them wherever.
Right. So you would set that view, and then.
So it's like, yeah, model set, whatever, other view, and then in your template for this component, you could say, curly other view, and then it'll just render it. Because it's a template. So it'll detect the type as a template, and then it'll render it. It's a little bit to wrap your head around, but it's extremely powerful.
Yeah.
It's like highly meta programming.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks a lot, Nate. It's a really cool feature to know about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to document because you have to understand it at like a pretty low level. It's fairly complicated, but in terms of like the mental model, but it is very flexible. You can do pretty much whatever, which is that's the advantage of making templates objects. It's like you can use them wherever. Cool. All right. We should run.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Cool.
Thank
See you guys
you.
next week.
Later.
Thanks to you.
Bye.
Bye.